Hello, I'm Teacher Victoria with Lead from Home. And today we have a very special guest in the bilingual dual language education platform. She is a renowned expert within the field, and she's going to connect her story to the importance of integrating culture and our stories to our lesson environment. Okay, I'm so excited, Alexandra. Would you mind giving just a brief introduction of who you are, your name, and where we can find you?
Yes, so my name is Alexandra Guilamo de Maso. I live in Chicago. I have been a teacher, an academic coach, of elementary building level principal, a district leader, mostly in Chicago, but in some very diverse suburbs around Chicago as well. I'm a language learner myself, and I am the founder and owner and lead consultant of Taju Educational Solutions, which for me, it was a labor of love because I kept finding myself having to correct PD or step in for my language learners and really advocate, and really felt like we needed a company that just dedicated itself to practitioners who understood and knew the power and the value and the affirmation and the possibility of bilingual and dual language education. Not as a subtractive, not let's get them into English, but how do we truly build the next generation of leaders over and over again?
I really like that you say that because it does start, well, it starts at home, but because that's where our language kind of blossoms and things. But when we go into the classroom, we should have the resources and tools available to our educators, our leaders in the field, to help cultivate that environment to say that, hey, it's okay. As a matter of fact, it's beyond okay. This is a part of who you are, and that self-discovery. We are part of that journey. We were talking a little bit before, and I love the story that you shared, that sometimes things happen in our journey that kind of put brakes on why we're not at where maybe mainstream society thinks that we should be, or even ourselves where we think that we should be when it comes to language and culture and where we feel we fit in.
Absolutely. So it was a natural story that just came out, and I'll share it again. So when I was in college, I was taking an advanced Spanish literacy course, and I had always felt a little bit self-conscious about my accent in Spanish because we were one of the very few Caribbean families in our area. And so it was a very new, exotic accent. We say oftentimes ajo instead of arroz. We say Puerto Rico instead of Puerto Rico. And so those nuances were really not looked highly upon by a lot of people around us. So in college, I was asked by a professor to read an excerpt, and I was reading it, and very quickly I figured out what was happening, which was it was a phonetic spelling of an excerpt of a piece of writing, of a piece of text. And a student made, or a peer made a comment about the fact that didn't make any sense what I had just read, that it was just nonsense. And the professor's response was, yes, exactly, because that's how it sounds when Puerto Ricans talk. And I realized that in that moment, I had been asked to read that because he was making a comment. It was sort of a dig against my accent and maybe what he perceived as comprehensible or incomprehensible for my accent. But I never spoke Spanish again in class throughout my entire university career. I never went back to that classroom. I was done. And so we want biliteracy, bilingualism. We love bilingual education and dual language education, but we have to also think about, are we subtractive or additive? Do we have an expectation of what Spanish is okay, what accent is okay, what terminology and vocabulary is okay or not okay? Because we can, through our own beliefs, sort of undermine what bilingual and dual language education were actually designed to do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That truly resonates with me. And I shared earlier too, is that there are blocks along the way. And I also shared with Alexandra, and maybe on this channel before for our family of viewers, but there was a time when I had to relearn a language, Spanish. My family is from South Texas area, so we are of Mexican heritage. And I remember coming back, and I had a great, I'd always, growing up, I had this lots of praise for speaking English without an accent, and that I was a great orator when it came to presentations. And then I had to present in Spanish. And I introduced myself in a place where my family and their family and generations back of family were known. As a matter of fact, when I presented and I gave my first name only because that was, typical. And at the end of all these gentlemen out in the audience, they all of their hands rose up, and I said, okay, what's your first question? They asked, what is your last name? And then the next question, who is your family? Are you related to this family? And they made the connection. And then they sat back, all of the gentlemen and some of the women sat back, and they just ruminated over that. They kind of processed that information. And when I went home, because of course I went home to talk to Mom, I got on the phone and I said, why did they do that? She says, get used to it. They're going to make those connections, and they're going to trace back where it was lost. And
but here's the funny thing. As human beings, we are wired to make connections. And so one of the most important things for dual language educators and bilingual educators to understand is like tapping into students' funds of knowledge, but know where they come from, their routines, their vocabulario cotidiano, right? Like their like how we say it at home when we're
colloquialism,
right? Like we are wired to make connections, and for educators, we have to help students make that connection. I understand that we live right now in such a high stakes world. We're like, everybody is like, yeah, but it's not going to be on the test. Yeah, but the data. Yeah, but I have to grow my students. Yeah, but if we shift the way we think so that we first help students understand like the ins and outs of what it is that we're trying to teach, right? And connect it to something that they already know. Absolutely. We wouldn't have to fight so hard for all the other stuff. The reality is that our students know the concept of addition.
They do.
Our students know the concept of pattern finding. They know so much because they live it every day. But when we bring them into school and we cut them off from everything that they already know from academic concepts, and it makes the work that much harder. And it makes students really feel like that life of addition, of literacy, of knowledge, of oral history that happens in their own homes, that it's less important than what is in the school, when in actuality, it's not. Because long after school, they still have to live in that world. They still are comfortable in their own skin.
They absolutely do. And you mentioned something about oral history. How much of oral history should we see or honor in the classroom? I know what my perspective would be, but since I'm not a dual language educator, I would kind of want to see a little bit of that integrated as far as how we practice the language, how we honor our language. One of the things that I know that you are a really big advocate for is language and our culture should not be extra. It should not be something that we do after the learning happens. It should be done as part of the process.
Yes, I have been quoted many times today.
Great quote.
So the approach that most schools take is like, okay, well, it's Hispanic Heritage Month. Let's plan something, right? But it's after the school day. It's after the important work of teaching and learning has already happened. Or it's Black History Month. Let's plan something, right? It's an add-on after the important stuff happens. And when we think about culture and equity and identity and diversity as something that's an add-on after the important work, it comes out exactly like that. And then it gets put away so that we can continue to disconnect students' identities and the diversity of our school and our community from instruction. For me, when we work with schools, and this is I have felt this so painfully throughout my schooling and as an educator. When we work with schools, we force that into the important work of learning and teaching. And so for us, it's not about where does it live, it lives everywhere. And so our lesson planning template, our weekly lesson planning templates, our unit planning process, our scope and sequence process, it embeds identity affirmation, translanguaging, diversity, social justice and action in every layer. Yes, we believe in reading about other people's stories. We have to, right? If I stay only stuck in my bubble, what feels comfortable to me, then I limit myself as a human being, right?
It is.
I have to learn from people from all over the place, whether they're Spanish speaking or not. But I don't only want to learn about other people's stories. I want to know that there are people that look like me, that sound like me, that have made important contributions. I want to know about the heroes that I can strive to be, because if we're talking about historical figures, let's be fair. There are historical figures and heroes from around the world.
And I love that you touched on this, that we should be celebrating our heroes that look, speak, sound like us, and behave like us. We should have those images in our minds as we proceed and process information and tackle advocacy or learning what it is to have a voice within the curriculum that is set before us. I remember that this one moment, and it's pivotal. It was one of those make it or break it moments, the ones where your eyes just opened up. And I was fortunate enough to have it when I was a junior in high school, and I will never forget it because this teacher was a history teacher, Anglo descent, and he presented one fact that just opened my mind and made me think, where have I been my entire life? Because he talked about, and he made reference to South Texas and the line that was drawn or that shaped Texas, when it happened, how it happened, how corporations came in, how government grants phrased their language to take the land from Native people. And so when that happened, my brain just went, uh-oh, where else did this happen in history? Why am I just hearing about it now? And what can I do to protect my family and my friends from this? And I was ringing that bell, like, did you know?
So right now, and it's funny because we do a Taju Times every week. I try to do it every week. And this week, it's really like last week was a really hard week for me, right? We do so much of our work that's coaching, and it's how do we quiet ourselves so that we can really listen and be intentional and strategic with teachers and principals and district leaders. But when my mind is so clouded with the events going on at the national level, it becomes really, really hard, right? And that's part of the work that we've had to do. How do we help teachers and leaders even make sense? And you talking about this, like, how do we use words? Well, we are language teachers. We are so equipped to be the best ones to do this, right? And so this is where the beauty of dual language especially comes in, because let's look at what's being said.
Right.
Let's look at their word choice. Where else in the world have we seen the juxtaposition of these words? We don't have to just talk about how we feel about this, right? It's important to give space to that. But I think that educators and leaders in the dual language and bilingual world can really be leaders in how we help students turn the corner from hopelessness into hope and love and future planning and social justice in action, by really thinking intentionally about what words did these people say. That's a standard. That's standards-based learning.
Yes.
Right? Okay, let's look at the different words that they used. Why might they have chosen this word instead of this word? Let's look at the author or the speaker, right?
Yes.
You. That is an absolute standard.
It is. We are all, and what is the message behind standardized testing? That we all need to know this because this is the truth. Right. But the truth lies somewhere in between, and knowing that there's layers, like you have mentioned, that are so relevant to each of us, because each of us was part of the story that created the American history, for example, that created that history, diverse in its nature. And it's important that you mentioned there's a connectedness that needs to happen. Because if we are not invested, or if we don't see ourselves, if we don't hear ourselves in our own history, in what is happening in contemporary America, then we do feel disconnected. We feel that our language or the way that we are presenting ourselves is not part of the norm. And when that happens, other things fall away. And I think that the coaching and the services that you are providing our educators is just really setting that bar for our learners to just be a part of society, to be those movers and shakers of the world, because they're feeling connected, because they're feeling heard and seen. But we've got to pay attention to those words.
Bingo. And so I'm very intentional with the words that I choose to accept, the actions that I choose to accept, and I ask others to really celebrate all the variations of language and regionalisms and dialects and slang and terminology that kids and our families utilize. We might be reading a book in class, and the author might use the word China, and it might throw kids off. Like, what in the world are they talking about? Like a person of Chinese descent? Like, what? It doesn't make sense here in the sentence. Yes. And it might help us to then highlight, listen, some of us say China. This is what it is. Here's a picture. Does anybody else have another word that they use for that? Oh, orange. Oh, naranja. Oh, right? Like, cutie, right? Like, there's so many words. And now in that one sentence, in that one little moment, students have a connection to 5 other terms that they can use, that not only connects it back to their house, right? Like, I taught somebody else a new word because I knew it, right? So it's affirming for their own identity, but it also helps every student in that space be able to connect with others that may come from all of those other backgrounds that may use that term. So it's access. Like, when we value and utilize the funds of knowledge and the regionalisms and the diverse, beautiful Spanish that comes from around the world, and English, right? And from all of our dual language programs, to be honest with you, like, it really is something that gives all students access to greater opportunities, greater connections, greater relationships, with diverse people.
It's great. I really love exploring the why, because it shows that yes, you truly are an inspiration within the field, and you are a leader, and it shows that there are that we should be celebrating these things, and that we're taking those opportunities, like you said, that moment right there, okay, it's time to break, showing that flexibility in our curriculum development and the way that we present information. And it really talks about being an active listener, because we ourselves as educators become part of just a facilitator in some senses. Like you're saying, we're facilitating learning in language acquisition in these, just by exercising these things, by being aware and listening and celebrating those moments. It's also empowering our students, because they can say it's okay to ask questions. Asking questions is not a bad thing. I'm going to learn, and it's, you know, who knows what we're going to find out at the end. So I absolutely am thrilled with this, and I'm really excited. Can you tell I'm excited about learning these things? But you also have a book that I was looking at, and I'm not going to get the name of it right, because I think it's bilingualism, and
it's running.
Please tell me you have a copy. I have a picture, and I'm going to have a link in our description box. So for anybody that's listening, check out the book. I saw
Coaching teachers in bilingual and dual language classrooms, a responsive cycle.
Yes, there it is. I'll have the name that you can go directly to it. It will be available to you. Can you tell us a little bit about the inspiration for getting that together? I've heard some bits and pieces of it coming together, that there was just what I'm hearing, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, please, just tell me. But
no.
What I'm hearing, I don't want to assume, but what I'm hearing is that you found and you observed a need and you met that need. And now you're just continuing that process by providing services and resources to educators in this field. That's what I see came from it.
So I always go back to like my roots, right? Like my parents were my first teachers. They are my last teachers. I still go to them when I'm struggling with something. I still call my abuelita in Santo Domingo, like when I need to just bring all the craziness down. Like, let's make sense of this. They're still my greatest source of strength. And they have a phrase that they always share, entre dicho y hecho hay un gran estrecho. And what that basically means in English is, in between saying or knowing and doing, there's a huge long road. And so what I was finding was that we would go to PD, and for me, I was always like a coaching principal. I wanted to be in the classrooms. I wanted to be giving feedback to teachers ongoing, not as part of the evaluation process, but part of how we built our own capacity to do good and right by kids. And so when I was a coach, I did this too. I walked into classrooms where they were using English, where they were using Spanish, might be using Arabic, they might be using Tagalog, and it never fazed me. But when I left a school-based role, the fact that so many people had refused to do that was shocking to me. And so we would be providing PD and coaching, and I'd say, okay, so let's follow up with this with whatever school-based coaches. And they're like, no, we don't have that. Well, who comes and observes you? And they would tell me, well, the person from the district comes because the principal or the literacy coach or the whatever doesn't speak. And I'd say, so what? I'd be like, this is one school, one community. How can you outsource people within the community? And when I realized that this was happening all across the country, more and more and more, and I looked at the numbers about how many dual language programs were actually being open, with this being the norm, right? The EL coordinator or district person or the bilingual coordinator or the district person, because most people at that time didn't have a dual language coordinator, a director, right? That they were the only source of support, whether it was one teacher, one school, or hundreds of teachers, hundreds of schools. It was just really, it was frustrating, and I got angry, right? And so I kept hearing stories about teachers that felt very lonely, teachers that kept being told, well, figure it out. teachers that were being asked to do like long hours of translating just for the purpose of an observation, teachers that just had been cut off from any support.
Isolation, I hear it as well.
Absolutely. And so this idea of how do I make sense of what it is that I do? Because I never had thought about it until I thought about it because I wasn't in my school or my buildings or with my teachers, right? And we began to craft this process. And then being a former principal, I knew that principals, like the teacher evaluation process is so cumbersome for most of us, right? That we couldn't have something that lives separately from that. And so we began to coordinate and read and talk to states and LEAs and all of the top evaluation frameworks, and we made sure that they were aligned and coordinated. So the Danielson framework and the Marizano framework and the TAP rubric, and right. So
that's a lot of investigation that you did to make sure that it was all in alignment. And what that does is reduces double work. It reduces all of these things, and it makes it a fluent system. That's what you did essentially. You did all the groundwork for this to work.
We did.
Recognizing the consequences if we don't do this, if we don't monitor, if we don't support, if we keep our teachers in isolation. What happens to the education outcomes? What happens to the student?
We know that one of the most influential determinants in terms of whether students are going to be successful or not is effective teachers. But for some of our most vulnerable students, our bilingual and dual language kiddos, we had cut teachers off from any form of like support and capacity building and real viable accountability. We were just bringing somebody in for a snapshot, walking away and saying, okay, we'll see you again in 3 months, without giving you any support again.
For implementation or follow-up, or to say, hey, do I have it? I have questions. Or now that I'm trying to implement it, it's not really fitting smoothly. And it sounds like these are ways to kind of avoid those issues from happening.
Absolutely. So we knew we had to address it, and we've been working with tons of districts. In the midst of this pandemic, we found ways to, rather than work with districts individually, we're now offering institutes nationwide so that people can get trained and understand how to engage in this process. And then, we still do lots and lots of one-on-one and district level coaching so that they can build their capacity. Because again, entre dicho y hecho.
Right. It is a journey. That really is it. There's an essential journey. Recognize that there is a challenge that needs to be addressed, and then the process along the way to really polish that message and enact, make those actions actionable, make it possible for others to do the same. If there are school districts or board members out in the audience, how would you say that they could get connected to you for those particular types of services, coaching or institutes to provide PDs?
We are trying to be much better about being really, really, really active on social media. If you see us dip off on social media and go MIA, it's because we are trying to get back into neutral, because part of our process is being really self-aware so that we can be the best coaches and active listeners for others. And so sometimes, especially when it's crazy in the world, we've got to work on ourselves and then come back out. We have an email, which is info@tajulearning.com, TAJUlearning.com, and then our website, www.tajulearning.com as well.
Oh, thank you so much for that. I will make sure that all of those resources are available in the description box, and you will see them throughout the week. Following up, we definitely want to reach out with you again to have these conversations. And I completely agree with you, as being a self-aware individual communicating with others, some of that kind of just comes off, and we making sure that we're self-aware, we take that time for self-care and to recenter really gets a good message. As a matter of fact, as leaders, we model that behavior. Where else are individuals going to learn but from us?
I will share with you, just so that you even see just how seriously we take this as an organization. I'll share with you the autoresponder that I had everybody in our company send out over the holiday break. It really was. Listen, this has taken a toll on us this year. And normally we would work for most of winter break, but I asked my entire company to take the time off, and I removed the barriers for them to be able to do so. And we just responded to everybody, listen, we're taking the time for self-care to honor and refill ourselves emotionally, spiritually, linguistically, culturally, physically. And we went
Get connected.
Yes.
Giving permission to celebrate who we are and recognizing that we are people of value, that we are worthy of this time to self-reflect. And not only that, be active participants in our own lives. I love that you gave permission to everyone to just, hey, it's time to check in.
So when we do, the funny thing is, when I gave a keynote yesterday to the Oregon Association of Bilingual Education, OABE, and I shared with them the equity norms that we use with our schools when we're working with them. And this first one has been so important for all of us in all of our schools this year. And it's that we remember that we are all human beings with a need for safety of heart, mind, body, and soul. And so that's a norm, right? Like we can't do or have any conversations or bring any texts or ask students to do any assignments or create policies that undermine that piece. And Absolutely. So for me, I will share that with you as well. I have tons of things that I share with you all.
Share. I am the sponge. I will take it all.
And the other piece that I was even thinking about, is we do a lot of systems work right now. We work a lot with teachers, but also leaders at the building level and at the district level. But I think it's important that when we talk about culture and learning, we have framed it to our schools and the people that we come in contact with as an idea of mirrors, windows, and doors. And it helps create a system, right? Like a thinking process to help people understand the what, the why, the how. Absolutely. The mirror is that it has to be like identity affirming. When we engage with students, we need to give them opportunities to really see themselves in the curriculum, see their heroes like we talked about, reflect their reference point, things that they can connect to, things that are going to be worthy of their time. Oftentimes, we tell kids that they have comprehension issues that are really not comprehension issues. They're disengagement issues, they're disconnection issues, they're reference points like a student that I was observing in a class, and I saw the student so confused. He was in an intervention. I'm like, tell me what you're reading. And he was like, I don't know what this is about. Who knows? And I asked him, I said, do you know what this is? It was a picture on the side. And he said, no. And it was of a tooth fairy. So, it's not an issue of that kiddo having a comprehension issue. It's that this book was all around and about and connected to something that he had no idea of. He didn't have
reference
knowledge, right?
No
reference point. And so when we use mirrors as an essential part of the teaching tools and the talk and the connections that we make, we give kids already 3 steps up into every standard that we want them to actually learn. The second piece is windows, right? Like we have a lot of families that are fabulous, fabulous families, right? But our kiddos at some point, my 3 kiddos are going to come into contact with people that think differently, that act differently, that behave differently, that have different values. And students need opportunities to see those things safely through books, through text, through talk, through activities, through school. right?
Right.
Because it expands their perspective as a value add. It may not be how they believe, it may not be how they were raised, but when we give them windows and glimpses into the world, again, it makes them better and more whole human beings.
Critical, those two components, I know you have one more, doors, but those two critical components already create critical thinkers.
Bingo.
Active reasoning. I mean, those are essential learning tools for just creating your identity, living and responding to the world. And because I come from a behavioral health background, I think of how important, how essential those tools are for creating coping skills, coping mechanisms for harder issues and challenges that we might see and face because they're not part of our original purview. So, I celebrate this.
And this is actually, I've gotten on a kick recently about this, because the danger, especially of us being in a remote setting, is that we spend a lot of time on computers and we spend a lot of time on the internet, and we've been spending a lot of time on social media, and it's really easy to thumbs up and walk away. It's really easy to thumbs down, post something, and then block that person and remove them from your circle, right? It's been really interesting to watch people close themselves off to only perspectives that reaffirm their belief system, rather than taking the opportunity to really listen and try to understand perspectives that are vastly different from our own. It is something that I have forced myself, and sometimes I have to step in for a moment because it's all I can handle, because it hurts. Right. It hurts to hear some of the things that are said and some of the things that are happening. But I need to understand it, because it's not going to go away. These perspectives exist, and it's in the world that my kids are in. So we gotta understand it. And that's the essential piece about windows. We can't remove ourselves from peering into perspectives and lives and worlds and norms and cultures that are different than our own. So.
Absolutely. That it goes back to creating that safe space and knowing what becoming an active part of life and making those critical decisions, coping, and those are all part of those layers that you're talking about. I am a believer, just like you, that the more information that I have, the more my ability to kind of meander through these spaces becomes, and I think that it does strengthen me. And you're right. Sometimes it's uncomfortable, and sometimes we, by creating these safe spaces in the education, in the classroom, because they can see themselves, they can hear themselves, they can stay connected, they can feel confident in their engagement, and kind of decipher what is going on. These different perspectives actually frame policy. They show us what we are learning. They are showing how we learn. So even if we're not participating, that we're exposed to it in a nice, safe space, we can have those conversations early and teach the language, like you said, the critical words. And I love that you used reaffirm beliefs, when in fact we should be, our belief system should be always changing, not too far, but at least kind of where we were when as far as our personality, our what we've been experiences and things of that nature. So I resonate with that message. And even though it's hard, we have to create that space for those courageous conversations.
And that's where the doors come in, right? Like, we have to create opportunities for our students to say, listen, this is a text that we learned. It's about a young lady in a Muslim country. It's about a young lady in a region of India or in a region of Africa. It's about, right? Like, of these different ways of living and being. Now, what do you do with that when you walk out of the doors of the school? We have locked learning into 4 walls. And so our students don't see, right, that who we are, what we believe, what we take from what we got from school, it was always meant to live outside of school.
Absolutely, because those stories stay.
Bingo. But if we don't open the door and say, now go onto the world, right? Like, this is an invitation to expand your perspective, to see the ways in which this concept, this idea, this conversation, these beliefs live outside the world. How do you add that to who you are now?
In my mind, when you were making that connection, I was going back to the reference you talked about with the tooth fairy. And that if there's no yes.
Absolutely. So our students need for teachers and for schools and for leaders to say, yes, there's this accountability piece. We have to understand and be prepared by schools to do well on tests. Tests aren't going away anytime soon, not even during the pandemic. But school, the goal of school is not a test. The goal of school is really to prepare students for life, to be leaders, the next generation of people, to be everything that we currently are. At a certain point, you and I are going to be too old to do the things that we are doing, and we need a generation of kiddos that are prepared to do it, right? And so how do we prepare them now to find whatever their greatness is going to be? And if we're only focused on the test, our system is failing our kids miserably and shorting them.
And this makes me remember what you said at the beginning of our conversation. What I was going back to was the reference that you made early on about that we should be teaching fundamental or critical thinking skills that are going beyond the classroom. That by creating these layers, we are creating a generation of people that are living within and changing policy, that are creating these safe spaces, that are learning how to pull information that they are connected to, and to build those bridges where there have been gaps historic gaps, that we're just closing those, building those bridges, and making sure that they can thrive.
Absolutely. So our kids have to write, right? Like, all students write. But for dual language and bilingual kiddos, like, daily writing is important. But what we ask them to write, who we ask them to write for, what we ask them to write about is completely within our control. So we can have them write responses like, what's your favorite season? Or we can, which there's a time and place for that.
Right.
Or we can have them as part of an integrated unit. We can have them talking to their parents about their journey, about what they think about this, about their most favorite tradition with their parents. They can call their grandparents and ask, how did you learn how to add? Like my daughter had to. That was one of her assignments. She called my grandmother in the Dominican Republic and she said, how did you learn to add? And my grandmother shared with her the most beautiful story that Talia then had to write about for school, about how my grandmother learned en la finca, en Quitasueño, that we learned by doing things. I needed to know how much rice I needed to get. And so I learned measurement. I needed to know how much, right? Like, I needed to know how many eggs. And so we learned counting and multiplication. And I needed to know how much money I was going to need. So I learned, right? But we didn't learn these things from a textbook.
No. World experience.
About, right? And so it really, when we see our students and our students' cultures and connections and oral history as the vehicle for really rigorous, really great learning, we're not learning different standards. It's not that we're not building towards biliteracy. It's not that we're not building towards bilingualism. It's just that we're building towards that through fabulosity, like through
yes.
So that our students always know just how much power that they had at their disposal from day one. We don't have to build them up after breaking them down. They
get enough of that.
Bingo. And so schools play a huge role in whether or not we do that, right?
Absolutely. And this, just to summarize, this really, again, it resonates with a lot of the things that I was hearing, and being part of this community, it really, it makes a great impression that we take those stories, the oral storytelling, and create it a living curriculum, because it does need to be passed down from head on. But when we take all those different pieces and put them together, those layers that you spoke about, seeing things through windows and doors, and allowing ourselves to be present in the curriculum, really, really putting that integration in there, we are able to meet those standards because we're developing those critical thinkers. Because we are giving them the resources that are saying, here's how you connect it. Here's what it means, or this is why they chose a tooth fairy. What are the allegories that are in this story? And of course, age appropriate, level appropriate, but giving them the tools to make that success, because there isn't a comprehension issue.
For most of our dual language and bilingual kiddos, what we label as a comprehension or a reading issue has very little to do with their ability to decode and encode or comprehend. Most of our kiddos have been grossly mislabeled, and for me, we will continue to do that work of making connections from the non-dual language and bilingual world into the dual language and bilingual world, so that our schools and our teachers and our dual language advocates don't have to continue working so hard and fighting against, but this is the assessment that we have to use. Well, it's going to give you the same data every single time, but I could tell you that assessment has been proven not to work with language learners. So yes. I don't know what to tell you.
So why use it?
Right? So where we see these injustices happen, for us, I think the greatest honor, but it's also, the greatest struggle is to say, how do we reconcile this? How do we do right by kids and communities and schools, knowing that if our teachers have to keep fighting this, they'll never make it, and neither will our students, right? And so we're doing lots of work around data right now. We're doing lots of work around systems planning, and how do we redefine and rethink policy if we wanna put that bumper sticker, we stand for equity. Look, we stand for equity. Everyone
know what it means.
Hashtag it. But I posted about it this weekend. I said, show me your policy and show me your budget, and I'll tell you if you really stand for equity. And so we now have, we know what the pieces of the system are. I don't want to share some of our projects in the works, right? We have 2021 is going to be a big fantabulous year for us. But I think it's a fantabulous year because of the honor of what it does change the dynamics of equity and justice for our kids, for our schools, and dual language and bilingual programs. All of our multilingual learners will benefit from it. So
I have to say, absolutely thank you. Just thank you for the work that you are doing. I know that there are other people that are maybe just learning as I am, being part of this process, or seeing things and knowing, well, what can I do? Where can I support? Where do I need to put or pay attention? And if this is you, don't worry. This is a process. And we are just so appreciative of, and I say the global we, because I know there are other people behind me saying, yes, girl, yes, we need you. We need you. Your voice needs to be heard. Not just Chicago. Chicago, you need to share. But to know that you are doing invaluable work. This is beyond recognizing the systemic challenges and going and using those resources, your experience to create these tools for educators is just, I have to say, I celebrate you. So I say thank you so much. And for anybody else that has questions for Alexandra, or you would like more information, don't forget, we've got her information in the description box. you'll be able to communicate with her through the email she gave earlier. The email was
info@tajulearning, TAJUlearning.com.
I love it.
And can I give one piece of advice?
Yes.
I know that we're probably just about at time, but here's my piece of advice. And it's I got it from my parents, right? They said I came out into this world ready to change it. And you'll know that you can change the world when you stop trying to change the world and you change and work on yourself first. And it has been so true. So if I can give any advice from my mother to the world that has worked for me, is if you really want to be a really, really great equity advocate, somebody who makes a difference for dual language and bilingual kiddos and multilingual learners all around the globe, is to know your story, know who you are, know where your biases are, know what experiences you have, and whether or not that matches the students that you serve. And if there's a disconnect, know that that's a limitation that you have, a blind spot for you. And it means that you're going to have to gain experiences directly from others that you serve. But if you don't know who you are, what you know, what's hurt you in your life that you're a little overly sensitive to, what you, right? Like, if you don't know you and where the limitations of that is, you're going to have a really hard time being able to be in this work long term. So start with yourself, know where your limitations are, and get information and bring on experiences that help you learn about others outside of your limitations. And to say, Latinos, we are going to not say that we stand with Black Lives Matter, because Black Lives Matters is a Latino issue too. Because Afro-Latinos have been kept out of Spanish-speaking history and stories for forever. And so it's a reckoning, for ourselves as well. But we need to see ourselves in this narrative and the words we choose to say about the context of everything happening in Black Lives Matter right now.
I absolutely agree. I resonate with this story and making sure that you speak from your truth, finding out even that deficit, because that is going to pull you to the information that you need in order to power up. I love that power up message. So I say thank you, and I hope that we can keep in contact, because I love the energy, and I love hearing about your progress and sharing resources as we continue in 2021. I too see great things. So I thank you so much for your time, Alexandra.
Thank you. Thank you.